Boa tarde, sejam todos bem-vindos à sessão técnica sobre o Congresso Mundial de Arquitetos da UIA. A partir de agora, então, a nossa fala vai ser em inglês com a nossa convidada e eu já vou passar a palavra para ela. So, I would like to greet Professor Mead, Head of CITA, Center for Information Technology and Architecture, and professor at Royal Danish Academy on the Institute of Architecture and Technology. Thank you for accepting our invitation. She will present the UIA World Congress of Architects that will take place in Copenhagen on July 2023. So, Professor Mead.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's a bit abstract to speak to you in this virtual world here. I don't see you, and I don't really know how many you are. I asked Andrea before, and she told me that you're mainly educators. So I hope I'm saying this in the right way. I am very, very thankful for the opportunity to present. As you all know, then the UIA 2020 was in Brazil in 21, and unfortunately none of us could come because of the pandemic. So we don't really have this direct handover that we would normally have, and also the experience of sharing the knowledge and the ways in which the Congress have been running before. So I'm very sad that this was not possible. But it is nice to feel in contact with you and also with the backlog of the 2020 events. I thought I would start with saying a little bit about who I am first. And then to present the UIA track. I am Mette Ramsgaard Thomsen, as Andrea just said. I am head of the Center for IT and Architecture in Copenhagen. CITA is a research environment, which is about 20 people around about, and we also have a master's. And we really look at new material processes, ideas of actuation, robotic fabrication, and big data algorithms with a sustainable and bio-based material outlook, asking ourselves how computation can challenge the way that we understand materials for a more sustainable future. So as you can see, it's a very small corner of what would be sustainable design. And I would say that I feel that it has been a journey to enter. I just realized yesterday that I've been working on this project since 2019. So 2 years, really, 2 and a bit years. And it has been a real journey for me personally to enter into really understanding the drivers of the SDGs and how this can challenge architecture at a much broader palette. So for me personally, it has been a great opportunity to be able to work on this project and to be able to really learn with the construction of what we're trying to do in Copenhagen. So as you might know, the UIA appointed Copenhagen to be the host already in 2017 to be the host of the UIA World Congress in 2023. And as you might know, then the UN SDGs were launched in 2016, and it was really with this in the background, trying to ask, well, how could architecture become a driver for understanding what the SDGs, how to achieve the SDGs. It was really with that in the background that we applied. I was not part of the team at this point, but the team around it applied to become a host. And you could say that in many ways, the SDGs have become sort of absorbed into culture. We know these this diagram, these icons from everywhere in the way that we are working in all kinds of corners of society. But often we are shown them as a sort of exploded set of goals, an exploded set of good achievements, and we have very little understanding of how we will build the roadmaps to actually achieve these goals. But what we can see here is, of course, that the SDGs is really a shared means to mitigate a situation of urgency. It creates a common language and a common set of measurements by which we can really try to track and understand how we are working for climate change and or against climate change and against the many problems that climate change actually propagates along with its own progression. So what we're trying to do here is really to position architecture as a means for change in the way that we as a society conceive, engage, and deliver services to central societal problems, understanding architecture as a driver to achieve the SDGs. But also to critically engage, to be part of the discussion, the ongoing discussion about what are the goals actually about, what is the societies in which these goals are activated, and how is it that we can work around the both social, environmental, and ecological challenges that the SDGs address. And we could say that this is not as immediate as we might think. In a way, there is a sort of benevolent part of the project to marry the SDGs with the architecture that can seem very straightforward. But at the same time, we must admit that the UN SDGs hardly mention the built environment and hardly mention architecture. And so it's clear to us that governance doesn't truly understand the agency and potential of architecture's important contribution in the way that we shape our societies, the way we use our resources, and the way that we impact our environment. I think that architects are incredibly aware of this. Nationally and internationally and across practice and academia, we see a great deal of research that is really looking at how architecture can change its practices, both its practices of social engagement, of architectural production, how architecture is designed, how community can become part of design ventures, how architecture uses resource both in the form of energy and in the form of material, and how these are cited within ecological or socio-ecological frameworks, how that affects back. And we can also see it in the way that our prizes, the way that our acknowledgements around in our different kinds of part of our architectural culture, how they are now being redirected from perhaps a sort of master architect kind of ethos to more these socio and ecological addresses that we all understand are so important. The UIA is part of this landscape. In 2019, it presented its Dhaka Declaration, mapping the SDGs to architecture and positioning architecture as a driver for sustainable change. In a way, the Dhaka Declaration is like a diagram of intention, but it also with it lies a series of commitments that allow us to try to understand how architecture can really be pushing the changes that it needs to do, both internally to our own design practices and also externally to the societal programs in which it is part. So what the UIA 2023 World Congress asks is how architecture can contribute to the UN SDGs, and how this can become a critical practice that doesn't just greenwash results or just present results in a benign, uncritical way, but rather how we can knowledge base this understanding and to with scientific research to be able to understand, well, what are the actual achievements that are possible and how is it that it's cited. So our vision is to understand how we can work together for both human and non-human well-being, how we can consider the built environment as part of the socio-ecological networks in which it takes place, and also how the societal models that form architecture can also address equity and equality across the board. The UIA 2023 also lies as an interesting midway point. 2023 is exactly at the middle of the SDGs, as they were launched in 2016 and they come to their completion in 2030. It can seem abstract, I feel, that 2030 would be the deadline for the SDGs. The SDGs are such a large project, it's a global project and has such far-reaching consequences that it can seem strange that we would be able to that we would want to complete them so fast in reality. But with the millennial goals in our backpack and understanding that these goals were actually achievable, I think that it is realistic for us to talk about that the goals would be achieved. So the midterm point is also a point of reckoning, where we move from a set of probes, a set of questions, a set of prototypes of methods, and we must move into the actual production, the production of that architecture, which is going to instigate that change. So that's where we want to position the Congress to be a place of knowledge sharing, a place of exchange, where we can connect and synergize international research, and to then also create a platform in which knowledge construction across academia and also practice can share the ways that knowledge are being constructed to be able to really start the change making that is necessary to be able to achieve the SDGs by 2030. This could also be called in another way to be acting in a decade of action. In 2019, the UN General Secretary called on all sectors of society to mobilize for a decade of action on 3 levels: so global action, local action, and people action. I think the point really is that we know that the change is happening now and that we must act in respect to the timeframes that are given to us. So in the same way, how is it that we can initiate action within this decade, and how is it that knowledge sharing within the Congress can support real action now? Working with the SDGs is also acknowledging a new Anthropocene position, in which we as humans have a significant impact on the Earth's geology and ecosystems through our actions of resource procurement, settlement building, and production-based pollution. So it is a way of understanding that no matter what we're doing, we're acting across and within the planetary boundaries, and that any sort of action is really trying to balance human action with the planetary boundaries. So to understand the SDGs not as a sort of exploded kaleidoscope of good intentions, but as a connected and interwoven fabric that brings together environment and humans, and in which any action must balance between the human needs and environmental and ecological boundaries. This is informed by Johan Rockström's work at the Resilience Center and now in Potsdam, who is also advisor to the UN, who really tries to understand that the SDGs are not are correlated to each other, and that the ecological foundation for our actions, for our societies, are always setting the framework around any sort of direct action. So in clustering the goals in respect to the environment, to human balances, we can see a sort of dimension spanning out between humans and environments, and we can see how different parts, technology, ecology, governmental issues, are addressed along along this dimension. We could say that design action, design realization, technology as design action are part of this, and in that way we can see architecture as being influencing all of the goals across the entirety of the dimension. So I want to move into how the science track content is organized, and also to outline the call in greater detail. So first of all, who is the we that I'm talking about? So myself and Martin Tamke are the general reporters, so the head of the science track, and together we have collected a very impressive, in our own words, scientific committee that we're very honored that would work with us on this project. They are led by, they have a series of panels. In the panels, we have panel heads, and they are then advised by special advisors that allow an overall conversation. The first act in creating the call and the structuring the scientific track has been to develop 6 research panels. These research panels allow us to have a conversation across architecture in all its influences on the SDGs, while retaining the knowledge that the SDGs are always connected. So they move from things that we think are very recognizable, such as climate adaptation or resilient communities, to more novel topics such as rethinking resource, design for health, design for inclusivity, and the critical engagement of partnerships for change. The way to build the panel has really, or the panels have really been based on an international mapping, working bottom up, looking at what people are working on, and understanding how the SDGs are addressed through local action across a global stage. So in this small booklet that we have uploaded, you can download also, we have found 120 profiles or actors working across the UIA regions and identifying the 6 topics that we have been discussing. The point of this is to say what research is out there, what knowledge is out there, what is the things that we want to bring to the table, who are the key actors that we want to engage with, and whose voices are leading the communities around them. So the 6 research panels, I want to go through them at some detail, and you can see here the way that it's structured is that we have 2 panel chairs. These panel chairs bring together knowledges from different kinds of contexts, different perspectives upon the field, and at the same time they drive a particular agenda, which is then divided into a series of sub-panels that ask very specific questions to the field. So for Design for Climate Adaptation, which is led by Professor Billy Faircloth and Professor Maybrit Pedersen-Sari from the US and New Zealand, respectively. Here we ask how high and low-tech solutions to environmental and ecological design can create regenerative, resilient, and adaptive architecture. The point here, from both Maybrit's and Billy's perspectives, sitting in very different parts of the world, is to think about what are the kinds of knowledges that can inform us to understand about resiliency and about new methods or old methods of working for climate adaptation. They have divided this into 7 potential sub-panels. These sub-panels move from questions of adaptation with indigenous knowledges, adaptation through frameworks, adaptation through feedback, through architectural technologies, through nature-based solutions, behavioral change, and action. In designing Design for Rethinking Resource, it is myself and Professor Carlo Ratti from MIT who are leading the panel. Here we are looking at circular design and how resource thinking is challenged by circular design principles. We explore strategies for shifting from exploitative to a restorative, regenerative, and circular design ideology, asking how we can imagine a future where resource guardianship and equity have become part of everyday practice. And all of this in context. I think one of the key thoughts that we have been working on is really that our focus on material practice and architecture is traditionally understood as contextless, as somehow the materials are brought to us in isolation, but materials are part of the socio-ecological networks from which they're resourced, and so therefore we must always understand how the processes of extraction and deployment affect the economic, social, and ecological consequences around them. In our sub-panel, we are discussing along a sort of circular movement here, how to think of resource and inclusivity, how to think of local resource procurement, material life cycles, fabrication futures, assembly futures, renewables, and waste recycling. For the panel of resilient communities, we have Anna Rubo and Juan Du, who are working together. They are from respectively the Earth Center at Columbia University and now Toronto University. And they ask how the way we design, build, and inhabit our communities can support equitable, participatory, and inclusive societies. Our questions here are very much about how the SDGs and everyday life, peoples as partners, global crises and rising inequality, local practices and global corporations, housing and the right to the city, digital democracies and for equitable communities, design, education, and resilient communities, how they affect the way that we understand what community building can be, and for whom the community is constructed. In Designing for Health, our fourth panel, we have Christian Benimana from Rwanda and Arif Hassan from Pakistan working together on developing the panel. And here really to understand how architecture can critically rethink the intersections between public health and living. I think now, after the pandemic, we're all aware that health is an architectural question. But in Christian and Arif's work, what they are trying to understand is really how this concern for health spans from issues of land availability and land ownership, settlement building, through more normative moments such as water security and health, and planning healthy and planning. Of course, also with a focus on COVID-19 and on health as a consequence, designing for healing, and research and education for healthy living. So these are the 7 panels that are of their key concern. The 5th panel asks what the role, potential, and responsibility architecture has in creating environments that are inclusive for all members of society. It is led by Ruth Baumeister from Aarhus Aarhus Architecture School, here in Denmark, and Magda Mustafa from the American University in Cairo, who are interested in understanding or questioning how architecture is a driver for the way that inclusivity is embodied in architecture, both for different kinds of bodies, but also for different kinds of identities. Here the subpanels are gender, race, ethnicity and minorities, ability, neurodiversity, age, poverty and socioeconomy, and the non-human and intersectionality. The final panel here is the design for partnerships for change, and in many ways, I think the most critical panel. The panel asks how architecture as practice and discourse can foster new alliances to promote a pluralistic, political, social, and ecological sustainable society. It is led by Sandy Halal and Merv Birdir from DAR and the Center for Spatial Justice, respectively. They ask how the panel emphasizes the inadequacy of existing definitions, partnerships, and methods on sustainability and development, but also the necessity of leaving no one behind. Across 6 panels, they ask here how to reframe community, reframe participation, reframing the commons, design, and agency and land. So as you can see, we have a lot of crossover between the panels, a lot of discussions. There's also a lot of content. The reason for making these sub-panels is to ask provocative questions that suggest the edges of our fields and the future perspectives of where the fields might be moving. At the same time, to create provocations that can allow us to host different kinds of research content inside of these different panels here. I wanted to say a little bit. I'm hoping that I'm still well in time, and that yes, that you can all hear me and everything is good. I can't get feedback, but I hope a little bit of talking allows me to see you all here. But I want to give a little bit of a sense of context. Of course, we're part of the triannual cycle of World Congresses. We're part of a larger trajectory in knowledge sharing. And what I think is the difference or the ambition of the UIA 2023 is to place the science track not at the periphery of the World Congress, but at the center, and to in this way be able to knowledge build, create and to position knowledge building at the center of the event. We are asked by the Congress to produce proceedings and to produce in the frame of something between 300 and 500 papers. And as you can see, when we start mapping out all of these subpanels, we're getting a wealth of different discussions that can host again a wealth of different papers. So this is also on par what we're asked to create by the UIA, and which also talks a little bit about the scale of the project that we are trying to undertake. We have been accepted by Springer Verlag to do the proceedings. They will present it as a book series in their Sustainable Development Goals series, which will be on the different within this book series, and the proceedings will be as a model here. A series of 6 different volumes that together bring the discussion forward. One of the key discussions that we've been having inside of the scientific committee is how to allow for the diverse experience and knowledge that are essential to articulate the particular agency of architecture to contribute to achieving all 17 SDGs. So what are the voices? what are the ways that in which we want to knowledge share, and is the scientific paper as we know it the right model for knowledge sharing? Who does it allow to speak and who does it silence? What we have been trying to do here within the remit of the UIA and the science track as it's given to us is to open up the formats of presentation. So along with the traditional research paper, which follows an IMRAD structure, which is the paper that many of us will know from conferences and journals. We have also invented 3 other formats which should allow for different kinds of knowledge contribution. We have a visual essay that is specifically driven to design research, and also hopefully can include knowledge sharing from practice and industry. We also have a narrative essay. A narrative essay could include submissions such as oral histories, storytelling, or dialogue formats, which would allow us to start thinking about knowledge coming out from other kinds of trajectories than research, such as traditional peoples, and the way that these can bring different kinds of knowledge to architectural practice. We also have a fourth format, which is the argumentative essay, which could be more provocative and ideas driven. So rather than saying that everything needs to follow a sort of thesis, hypothesis, and argument driven research, then we can also start looking at more speculative ideas that could be looking for new kinds of angles, blind spots, or other ways of understanding how we can suggest connections within the built environment in these ways. So if we come back to the big picture, then we could ask, well, what's our challenge? I think that we all saw the COP26 report, and it is clear to us that our situation is, of course, not bettering at all. It is sharpening. We know that COVID-19 has been a great regressor. It has brought the SDGs backwards. And I don't want to even speculate how the Ukraine-Russian war is also impacting our progress on the SDGs. I think what we are seeing generally around the board is that the status quo is just not good enough. It is not broad enough. It doesn't allow us to adequately address local grassroots or traditional thinking, low-tech thinking, and to bring that into architectural practice. It's not radical enough. It doesn't understand the technologies of design and fabrication, or it understands the technologies of design and fabrication as following positivist agendas. And it ignores largely humanist approaches which explore technology as a non-regulative field. And finally, it's not interdisciplinary enough. Ecological thinking challenges the boundaries of architecture and connects traditional, spatial, programmatic, and structural concerns to a wide array of new disciplines. So we are hoping that in our Congress we will be able to bring new audiences and new discussions together to be able to knowledge share across these 6 defined panels. Just to end here, I wanted to talk a little bit about the program of pre-events that we have been developing. Each panel lead, the panel chairs are developing a series of pre-events that they have been discussing together in order to be able to sharpen the discussion, to be able to start the discussion before we are together in 2023. These are all shared online, and you'll be able to find them on our website as they come along. They're all happening here in 2022. We had our first year at the very end of 2021. Carlo Ratti and myself organized a symposium, an online symposium on resourceful architecture, which examined approaches to resourcefulness in architecture, how sustainability challenges the foundations of material practices and how they can change with it. And here we looked at trying to understand all of the SD or all the individual SDGs, and did a mapping of how resources written about in each of these goals and how it affects the actual resource procurement. And these brought really interesting questions of how the question of optimization is dominating our field in architecture generally, but certainly also in digital design strategies, and how resource thinking can allow us to move from a blind moment of sort of optimization only to new models of thinking about what is it that we're trying to restore, how is it that architecture can address resource more holistically to work with a broader palette of resources and therefore more sensitively with the ecological systems from which a resource is brought. This is from an installation that we have been building in SITA over the last couple of years, looking at how we can use poor quality timber in structural elements in more strategic design procurements. So where are we now and where are we going? We have a long program here of events spanning from the end of last year up to 2023. We started our kickoff event, which is also available online. We have a series of pre-events. We're very interested in finding synergies with existing events. So if you're building events about the SDGs or about the topics that we're mentioning, we're very, very happy if we can host this also on our research platform on the UIA website to allow audiences from across the world to see this. We have a call which has just come out now here in March 2022. The submission date is actually not November, but in October. And then we have the Congress where we hope to have these discussions together in 2023. So please participate. I think that is my main message. Please do send your research to our call. We'd be very, very happy to involve you in the discussions that I have just been outlining. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Midi, and hope to see you in Copenhagen on July 23.
That would be wonderful, Andrea.
Yes. And then we will have a presential event, so it's much better than an online one.
Yes.
Bom, a gente vai fazer um pequeno intervalo agora e retornamos às 17h30 com a mesa de encerramento e com a posse da nova diretoria. Então, até logo mais.